Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity of being able to tell you a good story in the next 20 minutes of what we did by organisations or local government being able to work together on a collaborative basis to generate benefits for the patrons that were using the services by the various libraries concerned. So what is SWIFT? It's a consortium of library organisations that has implemented an integrated library management system throughout their libraries and is managed on a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week basis by a company called Circe Dynix. The members of SWIFT are large and small, country and metropolitan. Some are library corporations in their own right, some are attached to councils. The first TAFE library joined in 24 months ago. Some are interstate. So we've got a broad spectrum of libraries of all shapes and sizes. Initially there were 9 libraries that were involved when we set up the consortium. Since then there's been another 11 Victorian ones that have joined and 6 from New South Wales. All up 26 organisations that are operating together within the SWIFT consortium. So how did it all happen? There was a common need when 2 or 3 of the libraries back in 2005 needed to replace their systems. Instead of going out to tender individually, they decided to go together. From that, a number of others heard about it and decided to join in. I became involved at the time when we were starting to create the consortium itself and going to the market with a request for tender. We did all the evaluations. We've developed appropriate standards and operating procedures. And the important part is that we've had a collaborative team of people from each of the libraries concerned who work together to come up with the particular operating systems and operating procedures that everyone is happy with. No one can do anything unless everyone agrees to it. And there's been also, obviously, an exertion of a lot of blood, sweat and tears along the way. To give you an idea and a feel just for the size and some of the stats involved with it, there are 26 SWIFT members covering 44 councils, 170 branch locations, 13 mobile libraries, a bibliographic database of 1.1 million records and 3.5 million items. Have just on 800,000 active members. Since 2007, we've processed just over 102 million loans. Currently, 14 million loans are processed on an annual basis, or 1.2 million a month. In addition, there's 3.4 million interlibrary loans that are been handled since 2007. At present, about 850,000 per annum. And I'll just talk a little about interlibrary loans and what impact it's had in the whole consortium and the patrons of those councils shortly. The other interesting thing that's happened is that a bit over 5% of all loans that are made come from member libraries, which means that a patron goes into a library, the book isn't there, but it's in another member library, so that member library sends it to the library where the patron is, and those, because of what we've done and the way we've structured our databases, has created an enormous issue for behind-the-scene transactions and processing by councils, and I'll talk a little about that shortly. We are doing about 450,000 SMSs a year, 2 years ago that was 50,000. And that's all happened by stealth and it's the most successful thing I think we've done of anything in terms of satisfaction from patrons. If a book, for argument's sake, goes from library A to library B, the patron automatically has a message sent from the system saying your book's ready to collect. And the people's reaction to that has been fantastic. Their reaction is, my God, the library's in the 21st century. And it's a small thing that was done that has been very beneficial to the public. So we're doing about, the system itself is doing about 100,000 transactions a day. In terms of governance, the Swift Library Consortium is not a legal entity itself, it's just a name. But what we've done is that through MAB, they have a contract with Cersei Dynamics who provide the services. And they act for and on behalf of all of the participating libraries. There's then a back-to-back agreement with each of the participating libraries and MAB to provide the support from a legal point of view that the libraries are responsible for their own actions. In terms of the organisational structure, we have a management committee that meets twice a year, and they're looking at financial and legal obligations. The operations committee meets 6 times a year and looks at the operations of the consortium itself. There's a business manager, which is me, systems and admin, who is a guy who works full-time. My time involved is only part-time. And there's a user group where the real work is done. That's by people from each of the participating libraries meeting periodically to discuss issues. They might be a cataloguing problem or a technical issue. So we have a series of subject matter specialists. If there's an issue that needs to be looked at in detail, they'll be called in and they'll have a look and see what needs to be done. If a recommendation needs to be made, then it'll go up through the chain. In terms of the growth of the consortium, it will only grow if 2 conditions are met. One is that the current levels of services are being satisfied to all current members. And secondly, that members continually receive the benefits generated by the consortium. And if either of those 2 conditions are not met, then whatever it is we're wanting to do won't proceed. The components of the system, I'm not going to go through all this, but just to show you that we started off with the Symphony, which is the main operating system, shown at the bottom of this chart. All the rest of those boxes indicate additional services or functionality that's been added to the whole process since we went live in 2007. The financial arrangements for each participating library. When they join, there is an implementation cost and an annual maintenance cost, and that's paid directly to Cersei Dynamics. There is a consortium management fee that's paid at the MAB. That covers my costs, the costs of the admin manager, meeting costs and general admin. It runs to about $260,000, $270,000 a year. And that's paid on a pro rata basis. It's split up based on the size of the particular libraries. What have been some of the benefits to members? On average, there's been a saving of about 30% on their annual operating expenses. There's no need to perform any system monitoring or backups, backups, because that's all done automatically by Cersei Dynamics. They operate on a 24-hour basis, so that when Australia closes down, control switches to the States or to Scotland, whatever is the most appropriate place to go to. In terms of data, it's all kept in Australia. It's only the operations that are monitored from places outside. Functionality that would be difficult to justify in smaller libraries has been able to be implemented. A good example is Gunawarra, which would be the smallest library in the state, has got functions now that they would never have been able to afford in their own right. Automatically receive new updates of new releases that come, which is usually about twice a year. Capacity requirements are automatically met, and this was an important aspect that we negotiated early in the piece, not knowing how big Swift was going to be. What we said to Cersei Dynix at the time was, you need to ensure that we have sufficient storage and capacity to look after the needs, no matter how big or small Swift becomes. And that's been one of the key performance indicators that we've used, and it's worked very well. Reliable, stable operating environment. Obviously, it's important in any environment. In ours, we're constantly averaging 5 nines. Occasionally, we might have a blip and it goes to 4 nines, but it's certainly well exceeded what it was that we specified in the early stages. Savings through consortium purchases. One of the issues that's been happening, and it I suppose is across the board, as more and more organisations come to grips with dealing with consortiums, they have to have a different price structure on the products that they're offering. And so we've been able to generate quite significant savings in some of those areas. Use of modern systems has led to improved patron services. I think the basis of what we set out to do was to put a system in place that was stable, reliable, and that we could then, and flexible, so that we could build on it. And that's what we've been able to achieve. The implementation of a single bibliographic database has had a dramatic impact on the services that have been able to be provided by libraries. I mentioned before about the interlibrary loans. The government at the time, when we started all this, indicated they wanted to see greater access to the state's resources, i.e. what libraries held. And when we started out, there were overall 20 individual databases. And what we finished up doing was create, and so we've only got one. So that when a patron came along to look up a particular record, instead of seeing a database this big, it was this big, and it created overnight an enormous load on libraries to provide books that they'd never seen before. Because what tends to happen in libraries in the metropolitan area, they turn over their records about every 5 years, whereas in country libraries, they have them a lot longer. For argument's sake, Easton, which is the biggest library in Victoria, we thought early in the piece that they would be the biggest borrower of books, and it turned out, they'd be the biggest lender. It turned out they were the biggest borrower. Once again, using Gunawarra as an example, they would borrow 50 books a month, but they would lend 450 because they had older stock, and someone had come into the Metropolitan Library and say, I haven't read Gone with the Wind. And so they could see it, and then the system would allow them to transfer it, and it's worked fantastically well. Monthly operating reports. Before the system came on for the Swift libraries, the reports were a bit haphazard. We introduced some reports that were accurate, reliable, came out every month within the second working day of the month. Now we're about to introduce software that will allow the information to be accessed online instantaneously as the process is happening through the day. So if someone if the manager walks into a branch and wants to know what's happening there and then and what's happened in the last 3 to 4 hours, they'll push a button and be on and have that information produced for them. I've covered this in terms of interlibrary loans. There's been a massive increase. Potential to reallocate the use of and improve patron services and staff. Staff have been able to be rearranged within a library, and also if people go from one library to another, they've already been trained in the systems, and that's created a lot of benefits from that. We've been able to develop a lot of common standards and operating procedures that are uniform across the Swift group of libraries. And if a new library comes along and joins, one of the conditions is they have to agree to the standards that are in place. Changes can be made to them, but they're going to be made if everyone agrees to it. That's where the collaboration comes in. So what are the benefits for the patrons? Implementation of integrated library management system can be expanded as we're doing almost month by month at the moment. Developing common standards so that a patron gets treated the same way in each of the libraries when they want a particular activity to be undertaken. Expanding the size of the FIB database from many small unconnected databases to one large one. Increase the volume of interlibrary loans, as we've seen, has gone through the roof. Federated search capabilities, it means that instead of a person being able to access their own library, when they not only get the details of their own library, they can then access everything via the internet connected to that particular system. Interlibrary loan facilities, I've talked about. SMS messaging is continuing to skyrocket. Outreach home library services for those people who are incapacitated and can't get to their library. There are additional services being provided to that group of people. Chili Fresh is a book review where we can not only do reviews on books, but we can access reviews that have been done by people around the world on the books that are in the catalogue. And one of the, I suppose, exciting things that's happening at the moment is the use of new iPhone applications. You can now walk down the street with your iPhone or Android device, see what's on your particular library shelf, order it on the spot and collect it on the way home or have it sent to you. What are we currently doing for patrons? Continually working on, even though each library is connected to a council and have their own particular standards that they may wish, they're evolving as we advance, and people, patrons are requiring different requirements and needs, and we're starting to address those needs. Continuing the development of cloud computing facilities. I guess if the term cloud had been around when we started in 2005, we would have said we had cloud computing facilities. I guess then we called it software as a service or outsourcing, etc. Providing e-library downloads, that's an increasing demand. It's also an increasing problem for suppliers of resources, purely because who has ownership of copyright of the material and how do they control that. Continuing rollout of mobile devices, exploring ways of improving the courier system. The system we've got at the moment is fine, but it can be improved, and it's one thing that we've been talking to the state government about, trying to find a better way of moving the volumes of books that are now moving around, which is what's happened through interlibrary loans. introducing us with patron library card. It's a card that will be used by everyone within the consortium that will access all of their particular records within their particular library, etc. So in summary, what have we done? We've created a dynamic consortium based on member collaboration, not only within the state but between states. People said it could never happen that we could have New South Wales involved with Victoria. It was just a matter of applying a bit of common sense and realising that the Murray River isn't something that just divides us on a map, because what they do in New South Wales is exactly the same as they do in Victoria. Implemented a very stable environment in which we're operating. Some common operating systems, which is imperative to have operating in an environment such as this. Generated various savings for members, both from an operating point of view, but also particularly from a products point of view. Continually implementing new services for patrons. As I keep saying to libraries and librarians, the day we sit and sit on our hands, we'll have the Googles of this world replace what you're doing. We've got to try and be as creative and as forward-thinking as we can in the services that are being provided. We've seen the use of library data and resources being dramatically increased. That's all I wanted to cover. All I'd like to say is that something that was started off 7 years ago, in fact 9 years ago, because there was a couple of years of leading up to the stage we've got today. There are things that are happening today that there's no way we could have actually thought of when the concept first got together. All in all, I think people have enjoyed the process. It's been hard work, but it's one that's provided a lot of benefits, not only to libraries and staff at libraries, but particularly to patrons. And we've constantly, every 2 years we do a patron survey just to see what their views are, and they've all been very positive so far.